I just want to give you an update on Stellar and what I see here with Stellar. Um, Clearly, Stellar has a little bit more of a bullish structure than XRP currently. Um, there's a lot of potential ideas as to why that would be the case. We can talk about that here in a little bit, but let me just go ahead and change a couple of things here so that I don't get. Sometimes when you have too many lines on a screen, it can be confusing. So let's just start with a macro on Stellar. Let's go to the weekly chart. This is the Coinbase Stellar chart, and we're always looking at things in log scale. The reason we use a logarithmic scale with crypto is because you're dealing with exponential gains on tokens, and logarithmic scale really helps you gain a greater understanding of price related to percent gains, because the percentage gains in crypto are just so great. It helps give you a more nuanced view of the market. And so with that, yeah, we can talk about the difference between linear and log scale someday, but I look at everything in a logarithmic scale. So if my Stellar chart looks a little bit different than yours on TradingView, it's because the logarithmic scale is enabled. And yeah, just wanted to give you that piece of information. So with Stellar, coming out to the weekly chart and looking at the entire history of Stellar, Stellar had a similar situation that XRP did back in 2021. Both Stellar and XRP stayed internal to the old all-time high from, right there at the beginning of 2018, end of 2017. So when you come back to Stellar and you look at this weekly chart, you ask yourself, from an Elliott Wave perspective, and this is where I'm starting to think XRP is going to have higher targets as well, so hold on to your butts. But I think this is very indicative of Stellar. This was a wave one, and this was your wave two. And on the macro here, we're about to put in wave three, but that is not going to be the end of the story for Stellar. Yeah. Anybody who would say that this was wave three and see what's going to happen is if you come over to the XRP chart, I've seen a lot of Elliott Wave counts saying that this was wave one for XRP, and that this was wave three, this was wave four, and this is wave five. I don't think that's the case looking at Stellar. Stellar here, you can make an argument that this was some kind of weird, but there's just no impulsiveness there. This is still accumulation. This is your impulse. So this is wave one. So assuming if this was wave one, then let's start to see where Stellar might have a wave three. Typically, wave threes go to the 1618 extension. But in crypto, that can certainly be blown out, and in fact, many times it is. Many times in crypto, you'll come up here and hit the 2414, or you'll hit the 2618 fib extension for wave three. So 426, 425, 426. Once we hit that, we'll probably have a similar, sideways accumulation for wave four. And then wave five is typically, if wave three hits the 2618, then wave five typically will satisfy at the 4236. Okay? So I know. I'm showing you prices that you're gonna, you're gonna have to check your blood pressure over. But is this really out of the realm of possibility if Bitcoin is going to go to $500,000, 250, heck, even 170, is that out of the question? And what are we really starting here? So what I have to question as I look at the Stellar chart compared to others is, this looks like this was wave one. And if you want to test that theory, when you look at Elliott Wave rules, typically a wave one retraces 50 or the 618 of the initial wave one impulse. And what do we have? We have a front run of the 618. Okay. So Stellar clearly is bullish. There's no debating about that. Obviously, we still want to practice caution until we get above, 66 cents, 65.5 cents on Stellar. But I think clearly we're in the new wave 3 for Stellar, which is going to probably, most likely, come up here between $3.50 to $4.25. And so that will be your wave 3, assumed wave 3. We're making assumptions here based on data, based on looking at that. I just don't think that's a convincing wave 1 impulse. And so how can you say this was wave 1, this is wave 3, this is wave 4, and now we're just putting in a 5 after 7 years of sideways accumulation? And that's the other thing that we'll talk about here in a moment is, let me just finish that. Okay. Why would a token, this would be the same for XRP, why would you have 7 years of reaccumulation to only go and put in a high at $3 to $4? Now, you could argue that, well, over here, sugar, this was wave, again, can you even make an argument that this was a wave 1? So here's your 5-wave structure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, that's very clear. 1 impulse, 2 retrace, which if you really look at it, it's very similar to what we just did. Shorter time scale, right? Over here, this happened a lot quicker, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we had this sideways 7-year reaccumulation. Do you really think we're only going to go to $4.25? Now, am I going to take some profit there? Sure, I'm going to make some money. But what I'm saying is that we can't assume that that's going to be the very Pico top of the market when we've reaccumulated for 7 years only to go there. That it just doesn't make sense from a macro market supply and demand perspective. That kind of extension from a 7-year accumulation just doesn't make sense. $25 to $28 Stellar makes a lot more sense. And then, of course, you can see other targets that might be up there. Anyway, I say all that to say that Stellar is an interesting canary in the coal mine right now. It's telling me that the underlying market is actually more bullish than what we even think. When I look at a coin like Stellar, I say, okay, I don't really think you can make the argument that that was a wave 1 here. The counts I've been seeing on a lot of, and it can't be. It can't be. Here's why I know it can't be. Do you see that little booger right there? Hold on. I know some people have complained and said they can't see my mouse and stuff. I'm sorry. I'll try to figure out how to do that on my screen recording. But you see that little guy right there? This could not have been a wave 1. Why? Because that invalidates wave 1. That lower wick there, and this is on Coinbase. So this isn't on some random, low liquidity exchange where we could say, okay, that's an anomaly. This right here could not have been a wave 1 because of that right there. So this is your wave 1. This is your wave 3. And that is your wave 5, ladies and gentlemen. You might say, well, how do we get there? Market cap, but market cap, but market cap. I will put in the description of this video a link to an article written in 2018 by someone called Galgatron on Twitter. And he says that market cap is a myth, and I tend to agree with him. I think you're going to see a lot of new paradigms over the next year be established on how we even look at crypto in a traditional market sense. But this was your wave 1. Until I'm proven different on that, I have to assume that Stellar tells us where the real macro count is. And that goes for the rest of the market as well, right? Hold on 1 second. So that goes for the rest of the market as well. When I come over here to XRP, we've been getting a lot of fake out, telling us that this was wave 1. I can't see that. This was wave 1. Now we're getting ready for wave 3. And then wave 5 after a sideways wave 4. I'm guessing that based on time and price of what we've done so far. Now, granted, this next one could be shorter than 7 months. Perhaps this next sideways move, where we're establishing a range and building a floor, that next sideways move might be 7 weeks versus 7 months. This was 7 months. This one could be seven weeks. So after we hit $11 to $13, Maybe we move sideways in a range, for about 7 to 10 weeks. And then we put in our final fifth before the first quarter of January 2026, before the first quarter of 2026. So that's my thoughts on Stellar. I think midterm target 424, ultimate target, I'm going to go ahead and say it, $25 to $28. Let's just be, and you might say, Sugar, you're crazy. You know what? Stranger things have happened. And I think I have to lean towards that count based on this being the initial wave one. I do not think you can make the argument that that was wave one for XR or for Stellar. And again, does it make sense for us to accumulate for 7 years here to only go here? Or does market expansion, and there's a guy on YouTube, you need to follow him. I'll find his channel. He and I have had disagreements, but I really do respect his views. And he really makes this argument well. His name is Wooston. He has a YouTube channel called Champions Club. And he just does a great job of showing you how this just doesn't make logical sense. This starts to make sense, and perhaps even other targets. But I always look at what is the worst possible scenario of what could happen, not what, I always try to plan on the low side. And honestly, guys, that philosophy has saved my mental health over the last 8 years, right? I mean, I traded this and I took profit on this. Why? Because it enabled me to hold longer. And so my philosophy, and I'll get into that in a different video. I don't want this video to go too terribly long. But one thing that you'll notice in, hold on one second. Gotta keep an eye on those markets. One thing you'll notice with trading is that everybody has a little bit of a different trading psychology. So I want to be very careful as I give you my thoughts on the market that you don't take that as, this is what you have to do. Again, none of this is trading advice. None of this is financial advice. You're all adults. You're all responsible for your own personal decisions. But again, when you look at 7-year reaccumulations, you just have to ask yourself, what's the reasonable targets here? And so I think a reasonable target is 11 to 13. Could we then do a sideways accumulation and then go higher? That's definitely possible. I'm not going to rule that out, but I'm going to continue to watch the market and see what the market is telling me. What is Bitcoin doing when we get to around that $11 to $13 price? I mean, there's people that don't think that we're going to ever reach double digits on XRP, let alone go, to $20 or $30, or dare I even say it, 3 to 4 digits on XRP, right? But again, what's reasonable based on a 7-year reaccumulation? You had the SEC attacking Ripple and XRP for 4 years. We finally got clarity on that back here on July the 13th. Oh yeah, happy July the 13th, everyone. July the 13th, 2023, XRP was deemed not a security. July 13th, 2024, President Trump was almost assassinated. And now July 13th, 2025, we're starting to break out to a new all-time high on crypto. The simulation is getting weirder and weirder by the day. That's all I'll say on that. But yeah, back to Stellar. This was wave 1. This is wave 2. That's most likely wave 3. Let's see. We don't know where the extension is going to be yet. Most likely wave 3, wave 5. All right. Have a good one. And please let me know down in the comments if you think I'm crazy. That's fine. Listen, you're free to disagree. The beauty of a market, you'll find out, is that there's buyers and sellers, and you're free to take the opposite side of the trade. Listen, if you don't think that Stellar is going to break out to a new all-time high, take a short out right here. You're completely free to do that. So that's what I always tell people. If you disagree with me, take the other side of the trade and go from there. So that's the beauty of markets. You have buyers and sellers. You have people with differing opinions. I'm just sharing my opinions after being 8 years in this market, and I hope it helps as many people to break free from the matrix. Thank you.